Hi guys, we're here. We're going to do a simple little video on how to remove vintage cranks. Now this doesn't work for all vintage cranks, but it works for most of them. So anything from most stuff from the late 50s through the early 90s, even some modern bikes are still going to use this old style square taper crank. This one has a dust cap and a bolt. Some of them use an 8mm Allen head bolt. But not these dudes. This is the most common style you see on late 70s through early 90s bikes. And there are some tricks. These things will be very frustrating if you don't know the tricks. There are some special tools you need. People don't like to have special tools. You really have to have them. Some of them you can get away without, some you cannot. But bike tools are actually really cheap if you look at it. You're like, oh, that sucks. But I mean, most of these tools are in the $6 to $12 a piece range. So for 20 or 30 bucks, you can pull vintage square taper cranks off of a bike for the rest of your life. It's very hard to damage these tools. The first trick is it's got this Sugino dust cap. These are an old Sakai FX SLP crank. They're all the same. Suntour, Sakai, Sugino, Shimano. They're all basically the same. There are some weird French cranks that take their own special size threading, so you need a different tool for that. Which I also have. This is a cool one I got on eBay that has both Stronglight and TA French threaded sizes. Almost all Japanese, English, and Italian cranks are all going to use the standard threaded crank puller tool. This is the Park CCP22. This is real common. It's a threaded bit that threads in, and then a lever that threads in to push against the bottom bracket spindle and suck the crank off. Park made a few other versions of this. I had this cool one. It was like the real early version, the CCP number 1. And it was kind of cool because Schwinn was using a lot of TA stuff at the time. So it's got the regular English or Japanese standard crank thread, and then it's also got the TA French crank thread on the other side. You can just flip this, unthread this, and flip it over and thread it back on. So that's cool. So the first trick is these old dust caps. These ones have the big flat, the little round in the middle. People think you use a screwdriver. You will shatter them, break them if you use a screwdriver. The trick is to use a cone wrench. These are like $5-6. You can find them at swap meets and used bike shops and in the used bike tool section of places for like $1. I like to use the side of it. It's nice and round, so it's like a really big blunt screwdriver, and it can fit in there, and you can turn that dude and it just spins right off. They're often so frozen for a real screwdriver, and you twist it, the plastic starts shattering. And then your bone. If this thing's all messed up and shattered, really what you have to do is get a little chisel or an old sharp screwdriver and a hammer and chisel and chip away all the plastic out of the threads and try not to mangle the actual aluminum threads. I've done it. It's not super fun. This is the way. If you don't have one of these, maybe a butter knife or the side of a spoon. I know I've used butter knives in the past. Boom. That is out. The next specialty tool I'm going to use is the Park CCW5. It's got an 8mm for the 8mm Allen bolt style, and then it's got this 14mm on the other side for normal crank bolts. Most crank bolts are 14. There are some 15s. You can get a thin wall regular socket and ratchet and get these off too, so you don't need this tool if you have an 8mm Allen and a socket and a ratchet. But you know, it's pretty handy. That came off real easy. You gotta be careful when you do this or anything with cranks. It's really easy to slip and then punch. You use so much leverage, you punch these chain rings. I have tons of scars on my knuckles from punching chain rings and bleeding all over the place. Not a great time. You can turn this the boring long way, or you can sort of hold it back and spin the crank. Get this bolt to slide out. Another big tip here is most of these old style bolts have a separate washer. Some of them have a built-in washer and it comes out. This separate washer will wreck your life if you don't make sure you get it out with this crank bolt. If you leave it in there and you go and use the extractor tool, it only pushes against this washer and not the bottom bracket spindle, and it tears all the threads out of your cranks, making your cranks recycling and making them impossible to get off. So for a lot of people who don't have the time and energy to really go to that advanced stage of getting strip cranks off, you're going to throw away your frame and your cranks and buy a whole new bike, and it's a big drag. Now we're going to go to this Park CCP22 extractor tool. The safest way to use this is to thread this end all the way off and then thread it in here by hand, making sure it starts, making sure it goes in really nice and smooth the first couple threads. If you put it in crooked, you're going to strip your threads out, because these threads are pretty easy to strip. A lot of people will do it. The first time or two they do this. You got to learn the hard way. And once this tool is threaded in by hand a couple threads, you know it's in straight, everything's fine, these big weird fine threads. I like to use this big adjustable. It's probably a real size, it's probably 24 mil or something. Lots of other bike tools. Oh no, it's smaller than that guy, which is I think 1 inch for freewheel tools. You can get the right wrench and use it all the time, but I use this big adjustable. I use it just for this and for headset top nuts that are a weird size. You want to get this tool in pretty tight. You don't have to He-Man it, but you want it to kind of stop turning with normal pressure. You want it to be snug. The reason why I say it's the safest is because if you leave this handle in while tightening this down, sometimes this will bottom out in your bottom bracket and you'll think this is tight, but it's not. It's just stopping here. And then you go to pull it out and it yanks all the threads out of your crank. If you do all these steps the right way and safely, you will never destroy your cranks. I'm not trying to scare you too much, just trying to get you to do it the right way. Don't cut corners. It only takes 2 extra seconds. Now I'm going to use leverage. I'm going to pull down on this one to keep it from spinning. Pull down on this one. And this is forcing this center shaft through against the bottom bracket spindle, so it's sucking this crank tool and crank arms off. And just like that, you are off. You gotta get this tool out. Like loosening it with that big wrench, threading her out. We are free. Now we can come in here and inspect these crank threads and make sure they look perfectly good. Inspect these square tapers. Want to make sure they still look real nice and square. You can see, I don't know if I can get the light just right, you can see where the spindle stops like 5-6 millimeters from the outside edge of the square. See if we can kind of show that. You can kind of see it right there, that dark line. That means it's probably the first time these have ever been off, maybe the second. They've never been pressed on too far. These squares will press on too far. If you over tighten the cranks and you go to put them back on, you can stretch and stretch and stretch until they're blown out and will just fall right off. So, or come off while you're writing. So don't do that. When we go to put them back on, it's a whole different thing. You sort of put them on to get a feel for it, kind of tight, a little snug, a little bit more, but you don't want to keep just going and going and going, hoping it'll never be able to go more. So the thread looks pretty good. We just use the extractor tool, so we know the threads are good. The square tapers look good. There's not any rounding, blowed out dents on the inside. These pedal threads look great. Even the teeth on these rings look 80% new. This is a great crankset to reuse on something or sell. Now the other side's the exact same process. These cranks have definitely been off. This bottom bracket's been mangled a little bit. So it's been opened and overhauled, which makes sense. It's not loose, it's not too tight. No play. Feels pretty good. Maybe we'll even do this bottom bracket too, just to show it off. So I'm gonna pop this other crank off, then we'll start on that bottom bracket. It's a different dust cap. It's the same style with that weird slot and eye. Oh, thank you. It would have been nice if it actually would have broken a bit of paint so I could show it on the video, but using the old cone wrench to get her out. If you are going to buy a brand new cone wrench just for this, you should get one that is 1315. So this is the Park DCW-4, 1315. 13 is for most front hubs cone size, 15 is most rear hubs. This is one you'll use 99% of the time. So get that instead of something you'll never use for any other reason. You only need weird sizes when you're working on weird stuff. Oh, that came out pretty easies. Pulling this bolt out, making sure that washer is with it. Everything looks good in there. Maybe a little rusty. Spinning this tool back. Nope. Sometimes they're a butt. Sometimes it will not start. Sometimes you can go backwards a little bit. Sometimes I'll let it fall into place. Sometimes. Sometimes you're just doing it crooked. Sometimes you're just doing it crooked because your eyeballs are being weird. So just real nice and patient. Don't get flustered. I want to get flustered. The heater just kicked on. My hoodie's feel a little warm. It's making me a little flustered, it's making me overheat, get mad. There might be some damage to the first thread or two, causing it to be a problem. I might go in there with the side of a sharp little screwdriver and just make sure these first couple of threads are nice and straight, there's nothing in there. Bits of corrosion or rust or chips or splinters that keep this from starting. But I want you to start, bud. I don't think that's it. We're gonna wiggle it just a little bit to see. It is easy to cross thread, so I mean it's going in tight because it's real rusty in there. Paint. Don't think it's cross threading. I will pull it out just to see. I think it's just being extra tight. Could put some oil on this, a little lube. Checking to see those first couple threads have mangled, like I'm cross-threading it. They don't. Make sure this thing doesn't have, sometimes you cross-thread, you'll start tearing the threads out. You'll leave little bits of the aluminum from the crank in the threads of the tool. So making sure there's no aluminum in these threads. We're golden, it's just real crusty in there. I restarted easily because I've already cleaned those threads out by forcing it through. Okay, it's probably actually tight. Same with this. I'll cross thread it, make sure those threads line right up. Woo! Okay. Using leverage again. If you're little or have a bad angle or a hard time with leverage, you can use a cheater bar, put it on this tool, and that's like making you 10 times as strong. So make sure the cheater bar is really on there. And if you're really forcing it and it slips, it could fly off and punch in the face, so don't aim it at your face. A lot of people say cheater bars are unsafe. It's true if you're not being careful, I guess, because they could slip, but really, a lot of people need them. Like, this takes a lot of leverage for some of this stuff, and a lot of people just don't have the physical strength to do it. So, nothing wrong with the cheater bar. Just the hollow tube of steel or aluminum. This is an old aluminum bike frame that was dead. I just cut this down tube out before you throw stuff in recycling or try and save everything, even though it's totally junk and recycling and unsafe. Go ahead and cut yourself out a nice cheater bar out of the down tube. All right, let's do this bottom bracket. It's a weird one. It's got a weird little square. Sometimes they have different shapes and styles and ways of getting tools on. I have no idea if I have the right tool for this. I'm going to say probably not. But I'll dig around. This little shelf, it's a little thick, so we can probably use the adjustable wrench. Probably. But the first thing you gotta do is get this lock ring off. So there's 3 little teeth. It's lock ringy. Here's a bottom bracket tool. This one is like for the other side. It's 36mm wrench flats. Goes around the cup. But it's got the lock ring tool on this side. They make a few different sizes of these, so this one doesn't fit. Try a different one. And this one fits. And just like that, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Bike bottom brackets are weird for most things, English and Japanese. And it's going to be righty-tighty, lefty-loosey on the non-drive side. But on the drive side, it's reverse thread. Where French and Italian, it's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, like normal on both sides. Swiss did a French bottom bracket that's exactly the same as French, except for it's got the reverse threading like the English and Japanese stuff. So there's some weird stuff out there when you're getting into really vintage bikes from the 60s and 70s and whatnot. Let's just try this thing first. If this doesn't work, maybe we want to find a pretty flat wrench. That's all the right sizes there. Clamp it down. We're going to hope it doesn't slip. Hope this isn't in too tight. Oh, not a problem. Not tight at all. So that was nice. It's barely to crack loose. Sometimes these are tight. You have to find a wrench that fits. Sometimes I'll use a headset spacer or a freewheel tool or an old bottom bracket tool, something to bolt over so I can put the crank bolt and some washers on here and hold the tool on tight to this face. So mix and match things. So I have some extra long bolts here that are all crank threaded and some extra big washers. This is a cool old tool that you'll never find. It's really vintage, but it's the same thing. It'll hold a tool down tight and you can just hold it on the crank bolt. So this is Here's like a modern-y style one for cartridge bottom brackets. So this goes in and this pushes through. That nut sticks up and threads into this spindle to hold this tool on tight so it doesn't slip. So there's some cool solutions out there if things aren't nice and just spin. But it does. Maybe the other side's usually worse. All right, this is the drive side. It should be reverse threaded. It's very hard to get this tool on. It's very shallow little shelf for the tool to go on. Maybe it'll work for the big adjustable. Most standard bottom bracket tools are nice and thin to fit that. I'll go on and see this is a terrible angle. I can't get any leverage. This tube's in my way. Come down this way. It's a little bit better, but I'm pulling up so I can't really get good leverage. So I often flip the bike upside down. There is a real cool tool that you will never ever find in a million years that I love. I have one extra one. I know there's a second one for sale. I might go buy it. It's the Zog tool. So it's this bottom bracket cup shape, but it's got built-in leverage. It's a nice long handle. So we're going to try it out. So this would be righty loosey. I have to stand for this one. I'm going to come back and maybe shoulder the bike. So as I'm pulling, it can't really go up. Sometimes I'll put my shoulder up under the fork for the same reason. All right, buddy. So this is going to be righty-loosey if this tool will stay on, which it probably won't. It's already a little mangled and rounded. I'm going to go right to cheat mode. That's kind of a brat. That'll do it. Cheat mode. Cheat mode. Put this guy on. I got an 8mm crank bolt. That is not long enough, of course. So this is basically the same threads. I think it's like 8x1. You can take yours down to the hardware store and measure it. Of course, this one's way too long, so I'll be threading forever. And that's bottomed out. Okay, now the tool is on in place. This is basically just a spacer and a nut holding to the bottom bracket to hold it in place. Spacer so it won't go falling off every time I try and use it. Let's get leverage. Now this is a little weird because I usually say never clamp a bike tube. It's really easy to have the clamp too tight and damage it. Especially when we're going to be doing something like hitting it with this big tool. But here we are. So I want to go righty-loosey, so I want to push down. Now I have leverage. It's a lot easier to push down than it is to pull up. I've also got a cheater bar. Slide this cheater bar on. The whole bike stand wants to move. So maybe I can tighten it. If you're doing it off the ground, you can have this against the ground. Kind of hold it to keep it from going. Oh yeah! Just like that it moved. Like, if we were doing this with that little teeny tool, I'd probably be beating out with a hammer for 20 minutes. Now the trick is all this stuff's in the way. I might not need it anymore. Maybe come over this side. Oh yeah! Now the other trick for this, if I didn't have this tool, is I would have clamped this guy down and just taken a big hammer and whack, whack, whack until it broke free. So I do 99% of the time. That works great, but you know, if I can not hit things with a hammer on camera, it's a little more pro. And now we just thread these guys both out. We got everything. Sometimes you have to remove this little plastic BB guide because the screw will be sticking in the way. Inside of the bottom bracket, did a bearing just fall? A bearing just fell right out. It's never a good sign. These are supposed to be trapped in there. Rubber dust shield. It definitely has a hole in it. grinding or rubbing on something wrong. The other side. And the spindle. And the way you check to see if this thing's any good, right along this race where the bearings roll, you wipe all the grease off. I usually take a ballpoint pen and run it right along that polish line to make sure it feels perfectly smooth all the way around on both sides. If it doesn't, if it's just a little bit gruddy, you can reuse it if you want. You probably won't notice. If it's really pitted and gross and, you know, like a meteor field asteroid strikes in there, you should really just replace it. It's just going to add a bunch of friction while you're riding and make your cranks feel crunchy. Make your bike less fun. I do the same thing with the bearings. I'll always pull all those bearings out and clean the inside and make sure they're not pitted, and a ballpoint pen spins around real nice and smooth, and I'll put some fresh bearings in. You can just order bearings. Just go on eBay or Amazon or some wheels manufacturer and get good bearings. Don't get cheap Chinese things. Get grade 25 American things. Cheap ones will just become egg-shaped, destroy all your races. Or they'll crack and break, and they'll really destroy your races with little grenade metal shrapnel in there. So, you know, it's the difference between $3 for a wheel and $5 for a wheel. Just do the nicer one. And that is my story, and I am sticking to it. Cranks and bottom bracket removed the easy way. Putting them back in is a whole different video. So thanks for watching.